172.16.32.131. And this is where, if you wanted to perform advanced identification, it would go through and look for port 1334 and try to find the SQL servers and then enumerate based off of that. In this instance, it's just going to use mmap to discover it. So we found a SQL server. It's going to go ahead and brute force it. You see here it compromised this SQL server, this username, and this password. Now, if you had, say, 70 SQL servers, it would show all 70 of them there, and you can interact with whatever one you want to. So in this instance, we'll just use one. And we're going to do a interpreter console. And if you notice, what it'll do too is it'll automatically re-enable the XP command shell just in case it's disabled for you. Don't want a payload being stopped. So it's going through and doing our crazy hex conversions right now, getting our initial stager on there, and automatically going to compromise it for us. So it all handles it through you, and again, all through MS SQL itself, which is pretty nice. Just give it a second here to run while I drink some water. Fortunately, it's not the fastest, but it does work. So we converted our initial stager. Now this is our actual payload itself. And it's executing. And now we got our full command shell on the other end. All through MS. Fantastic. That sucks. Alright, so now we're done with that. What I want to show you through Fasttrack is my favorite one, which is what we call SQL ownage. That would be under Microsoft SQL Tools and SQL ownage. Now, what this does, so everybody knows what SQL injection is, right? Right? I don't have to explain SQL injection right now. So we're piggybacking SQL commands on a, not sanitized or not using a stored procedure or, not properly configuring our SQL servers type connection, right? So we're actually executing back-end commands on the SQL server. So conceptually thinking about this, if you have you're doing a pen test on the outside on the internet, and you have a website, it's got SQL injection on it. You find SQL injection, you start exploiting it. Where are you actually executing the commands at? On the SQL server. And where are most of our SQL servers at? DMZ. Yeah, right. How many people in the company put the SQL servers in DMZ? Alrighty then. So that was traditional. I mean, traditionally we are taught to put our SQL servers on our internal network because they'll be more protected there. Unfortunately, if I'm going after a website, what are the majority attack vectors going to be against that website that's going to compromise it? SQL injection. So we're not actually compromising the web front end, which is protecting us. We're actually compromising our SQL servers on the underlying operating system and fully compromising that machine inside your internal network, which gives us full access to your internal network, which is always great. So what SQL bonus does is it will go through and it will scan a class C or whatever you want to. It'll look for web servers. When it finds a web server, it'll automatically try to enumerate that web server, so it starts crawling it. Once it starts crawling it, it looks for any type of post parameter or query string parameter that it can find. And it starts fuzzing it. Fuzzing is not necessarily the right term, but it's essentially what it's doing. It's trying different combinations in order to identify if SQL injection is there. It does both error-based SQL injection and blind-based SQL injection. Blind takes a much longer time, obviously. But if you're doing error-based SQL injection, it's always good. And once it finds a SQL injection, it tries a couple of things. One is it re-enables the XP command shells for procedure for us, just in case. It tries to elevate our permissions to SA. And then it does the exact same tack you just saw that through MS SQL, all through the website, on the back-end MS SQL server. It gives you full access to that underlying operating system, which is great. So let's check it out. We're just going to go ahead to URL. You can scan subnet if you wanted to. And we're going to go after 172.16.32.131. So it detected detected two forms. It found that a SQL exception has been encountered in the text login input field, which means that the text login field post parameter is susceptible to SQL injection. So at this point, we're going to do a interpreter console. is I wanted to make it look like really cool. So everything you see there, it's actually, as it's going through, looks pretty slick. So watch that. So it's going to go through. It's going to take our initial stager payload, convert to hex for us, and then send the payload through the website. Now it does it in 9 different chunks. And the reason I had to chunk it is because what happens if you're using a GET request? GET request is limited to a specific amount of bytes per GET request. So instead what I did was I just chunked it up based off of whether it's a post or a GET, and it splits it into parts to get it to the underlying operating system. So this takes a little bit to do the initial bypass payload. But you can see here it's sending it in 9 different chunks. Turns out depth just in case too, just to make sure that we don't have any problems there. Should have made it faster, not good for demos. So it converts it, and then what it does is it takes the interpreter payload, converts it to hex, splits it into 100 byte chunks, and then again puts it back onto the underlying operating system. So this one just happens to take 2 of 8. It does it dynamically, so if it happens to be a bigger payload, whatever you want it to be, you can import your own. It doesn't matter, it'll just start doing it in different chunks. By the way, all of these attacks that we're using here are available if you go to the Metasploit Unleashed website. It shows you how to create a vulnerable web application, and this web application is vulnerable to the specific attacks. So it's sent in different chunks, A.8. Go ahead and executes it after it's unconverting, and we have a interpreter shell. So now we're sitting on our internal network, all nice and cozy, with interpreter. So always nice stuff. Any questions on this? Scared? So that's that. There's the auto and automation. I typically don't use that too much. If you don't want to remember all the commands for Mccray, stuff like that, you can just run the auto own stuff. Just enter an IP in, it does all the stuff for you and launches the exploits off of it. It's kind of it's like 4 lines of code. There's the mass client attack, which is similar to, if you're familiar with the browser auto own Metasploit, it generally does the same thing. So from a browser auto own perspective, as soon as you browse a website, it launches like a bazillion exploits at you. Same thing for this. This one, it uses a combination of what's built into Metasploit, as well as like Internet Explorer bugs that I found and published. They're also custom compiled in there as well. So as soon as you go to the website, enter your IP address you're listening on. So I'm 129. And I don't typically recommend this route. I mean, it's like firing a bazooka at something you can really just use like a knife.
It's not like too much counter.
It goes through and loads everything in a Metasploit for you, and it loads everything on the back end, and all you have to do is just browse it. And right now, this person is not going to be happy, because on the back end, it's running a ton of exploits. You can see here it's just firing off exploit after exploit. Oh, man. That's close. So it's going through, it's continuing, and if you look, this machine's probably not going to be too happy right now because it's doing a bunch of keep exploits. So if you look here, oh, perfect timing. So it's not going so good from as far as my performance goes. There we go. So it's spiking up and down, spiking up and down. Now, the reason it's spiking and you don't see the actual memory usage going is because it hasn't triggered on a specific exploit, so it hasn't filled the heap yet. But this will literally go on forever. Look here, I had no session, so, I mean, it didn't go so but it generally does work. Any questions on that? No? Good. Now, on the exploit side of things, it also has exploits built into it. So ones that weren't necessarily in Metasploit, we'll actually go through, and there's a few different ones in there that weren't necessarily put in Metasploit, or ones that I wrote and published that are in there as well. You can always use them as a direct exploit method as well. That's pretty much it from a Fasttrack perspective. So does anybody have any questions? Any questions at all? No? I appreciate it. Well, you can always go to secmaniac.com. I actually did some tutorials. So basically, some tutorials online that you can use that are voices. You know, I can voice over it so you can hear my voice the entire time. And then you can also email me at davek@social-engineer.org, or follow me on Twitter, which is Dave_Relic with a 1. So you can always ask a question. I think a lot of people here already have. So you'd be more than willing to send me any type of bug fixes or feature requests or things like that. And generally put it in pretty quickly from there. But appreciate your time, guys. Thanks.
And the MC is now blind.
Well, I believe that about wraps up today's presentations. We're going to be around for probably the next 30 minutes, then we got to break down. So feel free to bang on the boxes as much as you want for the next 30 minutes. Thereafter, I think some of us are going to Richo's in New Albany, and then we'll hang out some. Hopefully, did anybody have a good time at the event?
Yeah.
Thanks again to all of our speakers. Dave, Elliot, Pwrcycle, and Martin back there. Oh, and yeah, me. Thanks again to our sponsors, the ISSA, Kentuckiana, and also Tipping Point. And thanks to all the people in the ISSA committees to help actually organize all this. And to Johnny Long for having the charity, and HD Moore for Backtrack. Sorry, for I have a lot of things. It's been a long day for me. For Metasploit, and to Muzz and the entire Backtrack 14 for Backtrack. Is that better? Backtrack. Apparently Muzz isn't actually someone when you say Backtrack 3 times in a row. But that's all I have. Thank you very much for attending. Have a lovely evening.